Imagine pouring $80 billion into a digital universe, only to realize that the only people hanging out there are your own employees.
Right.
Or, picture building an artificial intelligence that was supposed to absolutely kill Hollywood.
Yeah, tools so powerful it literally had directors pausing major studio expansions.
Exactly, only to just quietly pull the plug on the entire project a few short months later.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of technological whiplash.
It really is.
Just yesterday, we were being sold this inevitable gleaming future. And today, the blueprints for that exact future are just being shredded right in front of us.
Welcome to this deep dive into the source material. We are so incredibly glad you were joining us today. Usually when we talk about the future, there's this expectation of a smooth, inevitable march forward.
Right, like an escalator.
Yes, it's sold to us like an escalator. You step on, and whether you are paying attention or not, you are carried toward this high-tech horizon. But stepping off that escalator today and looking at the news, that inevitable future feels like it's in free fall.
Which is exactly what we are going to unpack today. For this deep dive, we've gathered a massive stack of recent sources you provided. We're looking at hard financial journalism, deep-cut tech reporting, and some intensely charged sociological commentary.
Yeah, the heavy stuff.
Oh, very heavy. We are going to examine the sudden, spectacular collapse of big tech's most hyped projects.
And the mission here is to give you, the listener, the ultimate shortcut. We want you to understand not just the what specifically is crashing in Silicon Valley right now, but the why and the how.
Right.
What are the actual economic mechanics driving these massive boom and bust cycles? And perhaps more importantly, what are the underlying ideologies of the people burning billions of dollars to build them?
Exactly. But before we dive into the rubble, we really need to address the nature of the material we are dissecting today.
Yeah, good point.
Because we're going to be exploring some incredibly intense cultural critiques.
Yes, let's put a pin in this right at the top. We're looking at some heavily charged reporting today. And just as your guides through this stack of reading, our job isn't to tell you if these writers are right or wrong.
No, not at all.
But our sources today include intensely political and highly critical commentary, including claims that tech leaders are fascists or part of a doomsday cult.
Right.
To be absolutely clear to you, the listener, we are not taking sides or endorsing any of these political viewpoints or accusations. Our goal is strictly to report impartially on the fascinating arguments and ideas contained within these sources to help you understand the broader conversation happening right now.
Precisely. We are here to map out the territory of this debate for you, not to tell you where to settle. If you want to know why billions of dollars evaporate overnight and what the people driving that cash burn actually believe about humanity, well, this is how you get fully up to speed.
Okay, let's jump right in. We have two massive dual shutdowns absolutely dominating our sources today.
Yeah, two huge ones.
On one side, we have OpenAI officially shutting down its Sora video app. And on the other side, Meta is pulling the plug on the virtual reality side of Horizon Worlds. Let's start with Sora, because the whiplash here is just staggering. This was the magical text-to-video generator that had the entire entertainment industry in a cold sweat. And now, they're closing up shop.
And doing so with a whimper, not a bang. OpenAI put out a closure statement that was shockingly brief.
It was like 2 sentences.
Barely. They essentially just said goodbye to Sora, thanked the people who created and built the community around it, acknowledged the news was disappointing, and said they would share more soon. That was it.
One of the commentators in our sources, a YouTube critic who covers the tech industry, had a very visceral reaction to that PR release.
Yeah, they did not hold back.
No, they basically called it a dog shit closure statement. And honestly, they have a point.
They really do.
They noted that forum moderators shutting down a niche message board for, 200 people usually offer more profound, thoughtful goodbyes than the company that just promised to revolutionize global media.
The contrast between the initial world-shaking hype and this quiet backdoor exit is jarring. But the sources provide some fascinating user metrics that really start to explain the reality behind the curtain.
Yeah, let's talk about the numbers.
So when Sora launched, it experienced a massive viral surge. At its peak, it hit around 1 million daily active users.
Okay.
But then usage settled to around 750,000. Overall, they saw about 9.6 million total downloads. But the critical data point here, the one that really signals the failure, is that the app saw a 90% drop-off of users within 30 days.
Now, hold on. Let me stop you right there. This is where I want to push back a little on the commentary in our sources.
Okay, sure.
Because that YouTube critic initially claimed Sora lost 99% of its users, which sounds catastrophic. But then, looking at the actual data they cite, dropping from a peak of 1 million to a steady 750,000 daily users. Wait, no, Alexis, sorry. Dropping to 750,000 daily users, that doesn't actually seem like a massive failure to me.
Right, in a normal context.
Yeah. In the mobile app world, retaining 750,000 daily active users who are generating heavy, complex video content is nothing to sneeze at. Most startups would literally kill for that kind of retention.
You're entirely right to push back on the hyperbole there. A user base of 750,000 daily active users is robust for almost any traditional software platform.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
But what's fascinating here is that the commentator immediately pivots and hits on the crucial underlying reality. The user base wasn't the issue. The business model was.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the math here is wild, and I want to make sure we really understand the mechanics of it. Why is 750,000 users a death sentence for an AI company, but a gold mine for a normal software company?
It comes down to something called inference costs, which is a term we are going to see a lot more of in financial reporting.
Inference costs. Okay.
Think about a traditional app, like a social media feed or a banking app. When you open it, your phone sends a tiny request to a server.
Right.
The server fetches some text or a small image from a database and sends it back. It requires a minuscule fraction of a cent in electricity and computing power. The server's doing very basic retrieval.
Right, it's just opening a digital filing cabinet.
Exactly. But generative AI, specifically a complex transformer model like Sora, doesn't just retrieve data. It generates it from scratch every single time.
Wow. Okay.
So when a user types in a prompt like a cyberpunk city in the rain at night, the AI isn't finding a video of that. It is passing that text through billions, sometimes trillions, of parameters.
That sounds expensive.
It is doing complex matrix math across massive clusters of hyper-expensive GPUs, graphics processing units, to predict and generate every single pixel for 60 frames a second for a minute-long video.
So the sheer friction of creating the product is exponentially higher.
Astronomical. You are literally spinning up power-hungry supercomputers for every single user request. So while a traditional app might cost a company a fraction of a penny per user interaction, generating a high-definition AI video might cost the company actual dollars in pure server and electricity costs every single time someone hits generate.
Man.
Yeah. The sources suggest that the financial model for this kind of heavy generative technology only works if you achieve absolute ubiquity. You need the entire population completely dependent on it, paying premium subscription fees just to offset the massive hardware burn rate.
It's like building $1 trillion luxury hotel, but because the electricity bill to keep the lights on is so unfathomably high, you need the entire population of Earth to stay there every single night just to break even.
That's a great way to put it.
And if you only get 750,000 guests a night, which sounds like a lot of guests, you are still going bankrupt before the end of the month. The sheer mechanical cost of artificial intelligence makes even what we would consider a massive user base completely financially unviable.
Exactly. The physical infrastructure simply cannot support the business model at that scale. And we see that exact same dynamic, a fatal mismatch between user base and operating costs, playing out in our second collapse. Meta's Horizon Worlds.
Yes, let's pivot to Meta. According to the CNBC reporting in our stack, Meta is pulling their flagship VR social network from the Quest store at the end of March 2026.
Right.
They are fully shutting down the VR side of the platform on June 15th, and they are pivoting the whole thing to a mobile-only experience.
Which completely dismantles the original vision. The Metaverse, as Mark Zuckerberg aggressively pitched it, was entirely predicated on immersion.
Yeah, that was the whole point.
Right. The whole value proposition was that you weren't looking at a screen, you were stepping inside it.
Right. The entire pitch was strapping the headset on, feeling a sense of presence, and interacting in 3 dimensions. Moving it to a flat mobile app just makes it a clunky version of Roblox.
Pretty much.
But a version of Roblox that had billions of dollars set on fire to create it.
Tens of billions, actually. The scale of the capital destruction here is hard to overstate. The Reality Labs unit inside Meta, which was responsible for building this metaverse, has posted billions in losses quarter after quarter, year after year.
It's insane.
The CNBC report highlights that in just the 4th quarter of the previous year alone, that single unit reported an operating loss of $6.02 billion.
Over $6 billion in 90 days.
Just trying to wrap my head around that number.
Wait,
I was just trying to wrap my head around that number. How do you even spend that much money on a virtual world?
it goes into hardware research and development, subsidizing the cost of the Quest headsets so consumers will actually buy them, and paying massive salaries to thousands of highly specialized engineers and 3D artists.
And to try and stem this catastrophic bleeding, Meta had to cut over 1,000 employees from Reality Labs in January. That included gutting a studio called RO Interactive.
RO Interactive.
Yeah, which was a team specifically built just to make first-party games and content to give people a reason to actually visit Horizon Worlds.
But nobody visited.
No.
The CNBC report notes that Horizon Worlds never drew more than a couple 100,000 active monthly users. It's staggering. You spend tens of billions and you get the population of a mid-sized suburb to show up.
Exactly.
The general public just remained entirely skeptical. It turns out people don't actually want to strap a heavy, sweat-inducing screen to their face just to attend a virtual corporate meeting as a legless cartoon avatar.
The biological friction of VR, the motion sickness, the isolation from your physical surroundings, the sheer discomfort of the headset was something the tech executives wildly underestimated. They assumed if they built the software, human behavior would naturally bend to accommodate it.
And it didn't.
It didn't.
So we have two distinct technologies here. Generative video AI and virtual reality both promised a total revolution of human life, both secured absolute blank checks from investors, and both crashed headfirst into the exact same wall.
The unforgiving physical reality of infrastructure costs versus actual human demand.
Right. Which naturally leads to the most important question of this entire phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. If the math is this catastrophically bad, if the server costs are this high, and the user demand is this tepid, why do the smartest, wealthiest people in Silicon Valley keep building these massive money pits?
It's the million-dollar question, or billion-dollar question.
Right. Why pour $80 billion into a metaverse that nobody wanted, and then immediately pivot to burning billions on AI video that you have to shut down a few months later?
To answer that, we have to transition into the economic theory presented by the commentary sources in our stack. Because according to them, this isn't an accident.
Really?
No, it's a feature of the system.
Okay, let's dig into that. The YouTube commentator we're pulling from has an incredibly cynical answer to why do they build this. They argue that AI, the metaverse, NFTs, and Bitcoin are not actually distinct technological revolutions.
Right.
Functionally, and more importantly, economically, they are the exact same thing.
The source characterizes all of these massive trends as vessels for speculative investment, or, to use the crypto parlance they employ, rug pulls.
Wow.
The core argument being made here is that the modern tech industry has fundamentally transitioned away from its original purpose. It used to be about building useful products to generate sustainable, long-term revenue. Now it has become an engine specifically tuned for creating hype cycles.
Explain how that cycle actually works mechanically, like step by step.
Okay, so it starts with a pitch. Tech leaders identify a new, often nascent technology and pitch it not as a tool, but as a paradigm shift.
Right. This changes everything.
Exactly. They say, this isn't just software. This is the new internet. This is the whole future. By making the claim as absolute as possible, they attract an absolute tsunami of venture capital and retail investment.
So it's about the cash grab.
Totally. The goal in this phase isn't profitability. The goal is valuation. You want the stock price or the private valuation to go to the moon, based purely on the promise of tomorrow.
And to illustrate what this looks like on the ground inside these companies, the source brings in a fascinating perspective from a software engineer currently working in the industry.
Yeah, this was eye-opening.
This engineer claims that HR departments and executives are pushing AI integration with an intensity that they describe as beyond parity.
Right, the mandate from leadership is absolute.
The engineer states that integrating AI into their products is the only metric leadership cares about right now. It dictates bonuses, promotions, everything. And here is the kicker. They are forcing this AI integration even as software bugs drastically increase, the user experience degrades, and the overall quality of their core products noticeably declines.
It's crazy.
They are making their actual products worse just to say they have AI in them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the bubble life cycle that the source outlines, that engineer's frustrating experience makes perfect, ruthless economic sense.
How so?
The source theorizes that tech executives aren't blinded by optimism. They know it's a bubble.
Hold on. Are you seriously telling me that executives at trillion-dollar companies are intentionally torpedoing their own functional products just to pump a stock? That sounds like a pure conspiracy theory. How does the reporting actually back that up?
It sounds conspiratorial until you look at the incentive structures.
Okay.
The critique argues that executives know the technology, in its current, deeply flawed state, is practically useless for the specific tasks they are shoehorning it into.
Yeah.
They know it's hallucinatory, they know it's wildly expensive, and they know it's not going to work sustainably long term.
Right.
But their personal compensation, their stock options, are tied to the company's valuation today, not its stability 10 years from now.
So they aren't trying to make it work sustainably. They're just trying to make it as loud as possible for as long as possible.
Exactly. The goal is to inflate the valuation, secure the capital, and cash out before the physical reality of those server costs we talk about catches up with them.
Wow.
And the source makes a very astute historical comparison here to explain why the wealthy love bubbles. People mistakenly assume that when a financial bubble pops, the people at the top suffer. But look back at the 2008 housing crash, or even the dot-com crash in the early 2000s.
Right, like the massive fiber optic cable overbuild during the dot-com boom. Companies spent billions laying cables under the ocean, went bankrupt, and then the richest companies scooped up that infrastructure for pennies.
Precisely. The people who were massively wealthy before the pop used the ensuing panic and bankruptcy to consolidate power. They buy up the adjacent assets, the infrastructure, the talent, at fire sale prices. The bubble popping isn't a failure of the system. For the ultra-wealthy, it is a deliberate mechanism for the consolidation of market dominance.
Okay, I have to step in here and play devil's advocate again because I want to challenge this purely cynical view.
Play do.
The source we're reading claims that the only thing that makes AI different from the NFT craze or Bitcoin is that it happens to coincide with a mildly interesting new kind of technology for a text autocomplete.
Yeah, that's what they said.
I mean, is it really fair to reduce large language models and generative video to just text autocomplete? Isn't that willfully ignoring the massive underlying technical leaps in neural networks? I mean, we've seen AI do incredible things in medical protein folding, in accelerating coding, in real-time translation. It's not just a JPEG of a monkey.
It is a highly reductive view of the technology itself, yes. The capability of a transformer model, which operates by weighing the probability of billions of data points simultaneously to generate novel outputs, is vastly more complex than the autocomplete algorithm on your smartphone keyboard.
Right.
However, the economic critique the source is making doesn't necessarily rely on the technology being entirely useless. It relies on the technology being wildly overvalued and misapplied to justify a speculative frenzy.
Right. It's not that the tech does nothing. It's that it doesn't do enough to justify the trillions of dollars being poured into it.
Exactly.
It feels to me like the tech industry has essentially become a modern-day gold rush.
Right.
But if you look at history, the secret of the California gold rush is that the people out there digging in the dirt and the rivers rarely got rich. The people who got massively generationally wealthy were the ones selling the pickaxes, the shovels, and the denim jeans.
That is the perfect analogy for this moment.
In this AI bubble, the only actual unassailable business model seems to be the one selling the pickaxes. And right now that means NVIDIA. They are selling the highly specialized microscopic GPU chips required to run these massive server farms. They are printing money. Meanwhile, everyone else, Meta, OpenAI, Microsoft, is just panning in the river, hoping to find a nugget of a use case that makes them profitable while their operating costs slowly drown them.
And that profound desperation to find a nugget, to find a mainstream, profitable use case that justifies the billions they've already spent on those NVIDIA chips, leads these tech companies to make incredibly hasty and ultimately doomed partnerships.
Which brings us perfectly to our next major theme. Because if this is all a speculative bubble, we have to look at how it managed to briefly ensnare legacy media powerhouses outside of Silicon Valley. Let's look at the biggest corporate casualty of the Sora shutdown, the Walt Disney Company.
This is where the story jumps from the server farms of California straight into the executive boardrooms of Hollywood. According to the deep dive reporting from the Hollywood Reporter in our stack, Disney is officially exiting a massive $1 billion investment deal they had tentatively signed with OpenAI.
$1 billion. I mean, that is not a small pilot program. What was that money actually supposed to do?
The original plan was highly ambitious and, frankly, terrifying for anyone working in the entertainment industry. Disney was going to license its legendary characters, its incredibly valuable intellectual property from Mickey Mouse to Marvel superheroes for use specifically within Sora.
Wow.
The end game was to deeply integrate OpenAI's generative video technology directly into the Disney Plus streaming platform, allowing for highly personalized AI-generated entertainment on demand.
Let's trace the timeline of how this unraveled because it happened incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Sora launched last fall, and The Hollywood Reporter notes that it shocked and awed the entertainment industry.
Oh, totally.
I remember this. People were looking at these high-definition, physics-accurate AI videos and absolutely panicking. Tyler Perry publicly halted an $800 million studio expansion because he said Sora made physical sound stages obsolete.
The initial demonstration was undeniably powerful, but that awe almost immediately triggered a massive, visceral backlash from the actual people who make movies.
Right. Filmmakers, actors, and animators took a beat, looked at the hyper-realistic videos Sora was spitting out, and realized something fundamental. An AI model doesn't know what a cinematic lighting setup looks like by magic.
No, it doesn't.
It has to be taught. And the only way to teach it is to feed it millions of hours of existing copyrighted films and television shows.
Exactly. The creative community realized that these models were almost certainly trained on established IP and actors' likenesses without permission, without credit, and most importantly, without compensation.
This goes right back to the SAG-AFTRA and Writers Guild strikes we saw recently. The existential dread of being replaced by a machine that was trained on your own stolen labor. The outcry over Sora was so intense, so furious, that OpenAI had to rapidly backtrack. They started making all these sudden promises to give studios and talent more control over their likenesses and IP.
And this reveals a fundamental flaw in the classic Silicon Valley move fast and break things ethos when it is applied to the heavily fortified entertainment industry.
How so?
In the tech world, data is treated as an infinite free resource. You scrape the open web, you ingest the data, you build your product, and you ask for forgiveness later.
But in Hollywood, data isn't just data, it is intellectual property.
Precisely. In Hollywood, that data is guarded by armies of the most aggressive lawyers on Earth and protected by incredibly powerful labor unions. When OpenAI's Sora team had to concede the reality that they couldn't just freely generate videos of Darth Vader or gnome working actors without a strict, incredibly expensive legal framework, the magical, infinite promise of the tool evaporated. Suddenly, it wasn't a magic machine. It was a legal minefield.
Which perfectly explains the PR statement Disney released regarding pulling out of the billion-dollar deal. I want to read part of it because it is so politely corporate, it's almost chilling. They put out a release saying, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, that they respect OpenAI's decision to exit the video generation business and shift priorities, but they added that Disney will continue to engage with platforms to responsibly embrace new technologies that respect IP and the rights of creators.
So the last part, respect IP and the rights of creators, is the dagger.
Oh, absolutely.
Disney wanted the magic trick. They wanted the infinite content machine. But they realized the magician was essentially stealing from the audience to pull it off, and Disney cannot afford to be legally implicated in that kind of massive copyright infringement on a foundational level.
But if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the death of the Disney OpenAI deal doesn't mean AI video is dead forever. It creates a massive power vacuum.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, that is the danger. If the economics of compute costs are this bad and the legal liabilities are this high, you might assume everyone would just back out of the space.
Right, why touch it?
Because there are players who essentially have infinite capital and existing infrastructure. The Hollywood Reporter piece notes that with OpenAI stepping back and shutting Sora down, Google is now positioned as essentially the only player in the space with the scale to generate AI video at a global commercial level.
But wait, Google trained their models on the same internet OpenAI did? Aren't they facing the exact same lawsuits from IP holders and publishers?
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
Google is facing intense multi-billion-dollar lawsuits regarding copyright infringement and data scraping. The difference is their war chest.
Money.
Always. Google has their own massive proprietary server infrastructure. They aren't renting cloud space. They own the cloud.
Yeah.
And they have the cash reserves to simply employ endless legal teams, weather the judicial storm for a decade, and outlast any smaller competition.
The irony here is just incredible to me. Disney threw $1 billion at OpenAI because they wanted a magic, cost-free content machine. They wanted to bypass the expensive, messy human process of actually hiring writers, actors, and animators, and they walked away completely empty-handed.
Yeah.
But imagine you are a filmmaker or a creator listening to this right now. You are looking at the wreckage of Sora, and you are looking at Disney's billion-dollar dream falling apart. Are you breathing a sigh of relief that the AI threat has passed? Or are you just sitting there looking at a behemoth like Google, waiting for the other shoe to drop?
It is almost certainly the latter. The technology hasn't been uninvented. It has just been temporarily suffocated by its own massive costs and its own legal arrogance. But the corporate drive to automate creativity, to eliminate labor costs, won't stop. It will just regroup.
And that brings us to a really dark, fascinating turn in our source material, because up until now, we've looked at the money. We've looked at the $80 billion lost in the metaverse, the astronomical server inference costs, the corporate mega deals falling apart over copyright law. We've explained the what and the how, but the commentary sources we are analyzing today go a massive step further to explain the why. They argue that the drive behind these technologies, the reason these tech leaders keep pushing so relentlessly, despite the financial failures, the terrible user metrics, and the public backlash, isn't just financial. It is deeply, fundamentally ideological.
This is where the sociological critique from our commentary sources really takes center stage, and it's where the conversation gets incredibly intense. The commentator we are following asserts that the most powerful Silicon Valley leaders are not just misguided businessmen chasing a bad trend. The source explicitly argues they act like a doomsday cult.
A doomsday cult. I mean, that is incredibly strong language for people who run app companies.
It is designed to be provocative, but the source backs it up by analyzing their public statements and core beliefs. The claim is that these leaders view themselves as a sort of priestly tech caste, and their ultimate job, their calling, isn't to make software, but to invite in the singularity, specifically through AGI or artificial general intelligence.
Let's define those terms clearly for the listener because they get thrown around a lot. What is AGI and what is the singularity in the context of this critique?
AGI, artificial general intelligence, is the theoretical point where an AI system isn't just good at one thing, like generating video or playing chess, but is as smart or smarter than a human across every single cognitive domain. It can reason, plan, and learn autonomously.
Okay, so a true artificial brain.
Exactly. The singularity, a term popularized by futurists like Ray Kurzweil, is the hypothetical future point where technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unfathomable changes to human civilization. Usually, this is triggered by the creation of AGI, which then builds even smarter machines, leading to an intelligence explosion.
So it's the moment the machines take the wheel. And the source argues that these tech executives are actively trying to trigger this.
The source explicitly states that these leaders believe this AGI will descend upon mankind and fundamentally rewrite reality. It is an eschatological belief, a belief about the end of the world as we know it and the beginning of a new transcendent era.
Wow.
And to prove this isn't just fringe theory, the source points to a recent public statement by the head of NVIDIA, the company selling all those pickaxes. He recently claimed that AGI is already here. The source uses this as evidence of this deeply held, almost religious delusion that permeates the executive class of the tech industry.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And again, I must reiterate our impartiality disclaimer to you, the listener. We are unpacking some incredibly heavy stuff here. These are intense, staggering accusations of techno-fascism being made by the sociological sources we reviewed. We're examining these arguments as fascinating cultural concepts to understand the current backlash against tech, not endorsing them as objective facts.
Right. We're exploring the anatomy of the critique.
Exactly. But the source introduces a concept to explain this cult-like behavior that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. They describe this ideology as technology as an alternative to politics.
Let's break that argument down because it is the absolute crux of the ideological critique against Silicon Valley. Let's think about how traditional society works. In a traditional democracy, politics is inherently difficult. It is messy, it is slow, and it's full of friction.
Right.
If you have a grand vision for how the world should be run, you can't just mandate it. You have to engage in debate. You have to convince millions of people who vehemently disagree with your worldview. You have to compromise. You have to secure the consent of the governed through elections.
Right. Using a metaphor here, traditional politics is a massive, exhausting chess game where half the pieces on the board are actively arguing with you about the rules while you're trying to play. It takes decades to move the needle even a little bit.
Exactly. But the ideology of the tech elite, according to the source's critique, seeks to bypass that friction entirely. These leaders, who are used to writing code that executes flawlessly, don't want to engage in the messy, human friction of politics. They view human debate as a bug, not a feature. They want to impose a global order technologically, where their vision of the world is right by default.
How does that actually work in practice? Like, mechanically?
Think about it mechanically. If you control the central algorithm that dictates how information flows to billions of people, or if you control the foundational digital currency everyone must use to buy food, or the AI system that municipalities use to distribute resources, you don't need to ask for consent.
You don't have to win an election.
Exactly. You don't need to run for office. You merely update the software, and the physical world changes to fit your vision. You govern through infrastructure.
So, returning to my chess analogy, the sources are basically saying these leaders don't want to win the political chess game. They just want to digitally rewrite the code of the board itself, so your pieces literally cannot move unless they allow it.
That is a perfect distillation of the source's argument. And the commentator points to specific, real-world companies to ground this. They reference Palantir, the massive data analytics company that is heavily involved in government intelligence, military logistics, and predictive policing contracts.
Right.
The source uses Palantir as the prime example of this phenomenon, describing their operations as a tool for postmodern authoritarianism or managed democracy.
Managed democracy. Unpack that phrase. It sounds like an oxymoron. It means you still get to go to a physical polling place and pull a lever so you feel like you're participating?
But the participation is largely cosmetic. The illusion of voting remains, while the real arc of history, the actual parameters of what is possible within that society, is being directed by an unelected tech class who controls the underlying data, the surveillance grids, and the logistical infrastructure.
That is wild.
You are allowed to ask for different outcomes within a very narrow, technologically enforced window, but the overarching direction of society has already been programmed into the system by engineers you will never vote for.
It's a terrifying philosophical concept, the idea that we aren't losing our democracy to a military coup, but to a software update. And to ground these massive, sweeping, almost sci-fi accusations of techno-fascism, the sources don't just leave it abstract. They get extremely personal. They point to one specific tech billionaire to illustrate their point perfectly.
Which brings us to the final major theme of our deep dive, the American heresy and the long hesitation. The commentary sources focus their critique squarely and intensely on Peter Thiel.
Right. For those who might not know, Peter Thiel is a massive figure in Silicon Valley. He's a billionaire venture capitalist, one of the original co-founders of PayPal, an early investor in Facebook, and crucially, the founder of Palantir, the data company we just discussed.
To frame the critique against Thiel, the sources introduce an incredibly unexpected document. It isn't a tech blog or a financial report. It is a formal essay written by Father Paolo Benanti.
And Father Benanti is not just some random internet commentator. He is a Franciscan friar, a professor of ethics, and critically, he's the Pope's official advisor on artificial intelligence at the Vatican. The title of his essay alone is jaw-dropping. It's titled, "American Heresy, Should Peter Thiel Be Burned at the Stake?"
It is a striking title. It's important to clarify that the essay is using theological and historical language to make a deeply modern societal point. The central charge of Father Benanti's essay is that Thiel's actions, his investments, and his stated philosophies can be read as a prolonged act of heresy against the liberal consensus.
Let's define liberal consensus here, because in America, liberal just means left-wing. But in this context, it means something much broader, right?
Yes, in political philosophy, the liberal consensus refers to the foundational ideas of the post-World War II democratic order, the belief in universal human rights, the necessity of democratic compromise, the concept of a shared public reality, and the idea that all citizens have a baseline equality.
Okay, got it.
Father Benanti argues that Thiel's push for algorithmic governance and his support for bypassing democratic institutions view these very foundations of civil coexistence as outdated legacy systems. To Thiel's ideology, human equality and democratic debate are inefficient bottlenecks that need to be disrupted and discarded in favor of technological efficiency. That is the heresy.
And our commentary sources use that profound essay to set up a specific, viral, real-world moment that they argue proves this anti-human ideology perfectly. They pull from a video where a cultural commentator is reacting to a live interview between conservative New York Times journalist Ross Douthat and Peter Thiel.
The setting and the pacing of this interview are crucial to understanding the source's horror. Douthat is interviewing Thiel, and he asks a question that should, by all normal human standards, be an absolute, undeniable softball. It should be the easiest question in the world. He looks at Thiel and asks, simply, you would prefer the human race to endure, right?
And what follows, I watched the clip while preparing for this deep dive. What follows is described by the sources as a truly agonizing 30-second hesitation. It is deeply uncomfortable to watch. Thiel doesn't just say yes and laugh it off. He physically struggles.
Yeah, he really...
He stammers, he pauses for massive stretches of silence. He looks down, he says, well, yes, I don't know. I would, it is a remarkably uncomfortably long time for a human being to think about whether or not humanity itself should continue to exist.
The reaction from the commentator analyzing this video in our source is visceral and immediate. They call this behavior an Epsteinite ideology and state flatly that leaders holding these views, quote, hate humanity.
As the voice of the listener here, I have to react to the sheer bizarre nature of that hesitation. If you are a billionaire who is actively building the surveillance apparatus for global militaries, the financial infrastructure of the internet, and the artificial intelligence that will guide the future, shouldn't a baseline reflexive belief in the survival of the people actually using those systems be the absolute bare minimum requirement for the job? How should humans endure? A trick question for this guy.
This raises an important question, perhaps the single most important philosophical question of this entire deep dive. Why would a brilliant billionaire, a massive government contractor, hesitate on such a foundational question?
Exactly. What is the internal calculus happening in those 30 seconds?
The sociological source unpacks this and arrives at a truly chilling conclusion. They argue that to figures who are deeply steeped in this specific accelerationist Silicon Valley ideology, humanity is not viewed as an end in itself. Humanity is not sacred. Humanity is viewed merely as a biological factory, a messy, highly inefficient, temporary legacy system that currently happens to produce wealth, data, and power.
A legacy system, like an old version of Windows you can't wait to uninstall.
Yes. The source argues their ultimate ideological goal is to bypass humanity entirely. If you genuinely believe that AGI is the next necessary evolutionary step of the universe, and you view human biology as fragile and human politics as an annoying obstacle, then the endurance of the human race is no longer your top priority.
Wow.
Humanity becomes a transitional phase. We're just the biological bootloader for the machine intelligence.
That is...
Therefore, when a journalist asks if humanity should endure, the honest ideological answer from that perspective isn't a simple reflexive yes. It requires a 30-second internal calculus about what the word endure even means in a post-human algorithmic future. Do we endure as pets to the AGI? Do we endure as uploaded consciousnesses? Do we need to physically endure it all if the machines carry our legacy forward? That is what is happening in the silence.
So bring this all the way back down to earth. What does this all mean for us? For the people listening to this right now who just want to live their lives, go to work, use their smartphones to text their kids, and not worry about being categorized as obsolete legacy hardware by a billionaire's ideology.
It means that we have to change how we view the tech industry. The tools we are adopting, the platforms that shape how we communicate, how we bank, how we see reality, are potentially being designed and controlled by individuals who hold fundamentally different and perhaps hostile values about the worth of human consensus and human survival than the average person does.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's take a breath and summarize the incredible ground we've covered, because we mapped out a massive shift in the modern world today. We started in the financial wreckage, looking at the collapse of billion-dollar bets.
Right.
We saw OpenAI shutting down the Sora video generator and Meta retreating from the virtual reality metaverse, proving that the unfathomable infrastructure and compute costs of these technologies are currently colliding violently with actual human demand and basic economics.
We then explored the critical economic theory that these tech waves aren't distinct magical revolutions, but rather a speculative hamster wheel. We look at how they function as a series of manufactured hype cycles designed to attract capital and eventually consolidate wealth and market share when the bubbles inevitably pop, as we saw with the collapse of mega deals like Disney's billion-dollar investment in OpenAI over IP and copyright realities.
And finally, we unpacked the intense, highly critical sociological commentary surrounding the core ideology of the people building these tools. We looked at the accusations of a tech priest class acting as a doomsday cult. We explored how they might be seeking to use technology, and specifically AGI, as an authoritarian alternative to the messy human friction of democratic politics, culminating in that chilling 30-second hesitation over whether the human race should even survive.
It is a profound shift. We can no longer view the technology industry simply as a sector that makes consumer electronics and fun apps. We have to view it as a sector actively attempting to program the fundamental architecture and the boundaries of our future society.
Which leaves us with a final thought I want to leave with you, the listener. We started this deep dive talking about the escalator of the future and how the massive, world-changing platforms of VR and AI video were currently being dismantled because they were too expensive and people didn't actually want them. Right now, in this exact moment, we are lucky. If we don't like the metaverse, we can just choose not to put on the headset. If we don't like AI video, we can choose not to use the generator.
Yeah.
But if the intensely critical commentary in our sources today is right, if the underlying technology of our world is increasingly being designed by people who view it as a deliberate weapon to bypass the messy reality of human consensus and democratic debate, what happens when the next bubble they build isn't a social network or an app we can ignore? What happens when the next thing they build is a systemic infrastructure, a financial grid, an algorithmic legal system, a surveillance state that we literally cannot opt out of?
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this extensive exploration has given you a powerful, nuanced, new lens through which to view the headlines coming out of Silicon Valley.
Until next time, keep questioning the blueprints of tomorrow.